Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. As you can see, as we were walking in the door, we are at a really cool place and we are in for a treat. As we look up, there are some really neat things going on, but of course we're going to explore. Today I paid $6 so that we could come to the balloon museum. As you enter the museum, you are greeted by two hot air balloons and this sign right here that says the world changed forever. In 1783, man freed himself from the confines of gravity with the invention of flight. In that single year, they had both gas and hot air balloons. And so all those years back, and now we're still celebrating hot air balloons. Now, I am in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that is one of the capitals for hot air balloons, I must say. They have a balloon festival here where people from around the world flock to this area to see the thousands of balloons ascend into the sky. Now, you can see them in various parts of New Mexico and Arizona, just at different times, but this is one of the largest convergences in the United States. It is spectacular, and I'm hoping one day we can find our way here for that festival to be able to see the sky light up with all the beautiful colors. But until then, we're gonna go through the museum to find out why exactly it's here in Albuquerque. But before we get to Albuquerque and its history, there is a display here talking about some of the beautiful antiques which adorn hot air balloons of the earliest times. I mean, can you just imagine? Look at that. It's a little basket that's not really a basket. It looks kind of like a little boat. Now, throughout the first gallery, they have a series of different kinds of balloons that you can see a little bit more closely. And this one somewhat resembles the one that we just saw. This one's called Blanchard's Balloon, and it was named after Jean-Pierre Blanchard. Alongside each one of these displays, you can also find some more information and context for the balloons. For example, this right here says that the balloon almost fell into the English Channel. That's right, it almost fell into the channel. Wow. Now, of course, I always say envision yourself in these scenarios. This was a gas-powered balloon, and it was a two-manner, and you could see it had a little flume up and then the big balloon itself. But each of these was shaped a little bit differently. They used a little different look to them and the colors that they used. Now, that's something that we're real familiar with now, the colors. When you think about the hot air balloons, you think about the sky lighting up with all the beautiful vibrant colors, and that was still the case even back then. They have a variety of different kinds of balloons, yes, the gas and then the hot air, but the one consistent thing about each of them was that they had those bright balloonous structures. So as we're walking around here, I'm going to show you a few more of the historic photos that are in this front gallery, and then also something really interesting that I don't exactly know what it is. Oh yeah, we can also take a balloon selfie. We might do that in a minute, but first onto the history. Now, right here is something super familiar. You can actually crush a penny and get a commemorative coin for only 51 cents that has a variation of different designs. You can see here what those designs are, but right next to that are some other very interesting medallions and coins. In fact, each of these is a historic coin that commemorates a special event that had happened. You can see here, this one's from 1889, 1868 up here. And then you also can go over here and see some of the others. The details on these are epic, and they all, again, commemorate something kind of neat. So right here, for example, this is an Ascension souvenir from the captive balloon in Mexico City in 1892. Wow. I was just watching something about one of the Hollywood cemeteries. The Balloon Man is buried there, and he's the man who actually strapped his lawn chair to a series of balloons and flew over LAX and got in a little bit of trouble. But can you imagine hanging on to a balloon just by your hand there? Yeah, so it looks like here he is actually riding what looks like a parachute after being in this balloon over here, and this is called Drop from the clouds. Now that picture actually goes right along with the thing I was really curious about. I didn't know if this was a ruffled balloon that was just kind of scrunched up or what it was, but it looks like a parachute. Sure enough, it is one of those parachutes right here. And with each display, you can find a tiny little placard that tells you what it was from. This was actually from Marie Merton, and she was a person who would parachute from balloons. It was a very novel thing that they would do for entertainment. And so here you can find not only the parachute, but the ring that she would hold on to. It would be a wild thing, but it would, again, look kind of like this guy over here. Wild. Just across from all of the history, we find the 50 years of the Balloon Festival here in Albuquerque. And there are a variety of different sponsors that you can find on this wall, in addition to a small sign over here, which we're going to go check out in just a moment. But I want to draw our attention to the 50 first. Do you see all of these pins? These are all pins that have been associated with the Balloon Festival here in Albuquerque, and they line up next to each other and form this impressive, colorful, vibrant sign. Now this little sign over here actually shows some of the exhibition sponsors, and I just wanted to make sure that I drew your attention to this because without these people, this particular exhibit would not be available to us. So thank you if you were on this sign or on this wall. Now just past that, there's this interesting thing. We have seen drones. In fact, I have a drone. It's a little bitty and it takes really cool shots. But did you know that this is an aerial camera that would work very similar to a drone, except for it would be attached to a balloon. This right here would be attached to a balloon, and it would take beautiful images from the skies. So this was one of the most primitive drones that we know of. But let's go back to that 50th anniversary sign and look at this. This is a display of all of the different countries who have participated in the Albuquerque Balloon Festival over the years, and you can see here it is a large representation of countries, everything from the United States, which is the obvious, to Portugal, Poland, Pakistan, the Netherlands, Mexico, Italy, Japan, Germany, Hungary, the Czech Republic, even Belarus. And I always love a good art sculpture. So as we're moving in, we move to this section that says about the artist. And this is called the Bloom Box, which kind of makes sense. There's beautiful, vibrant colors here, and then blooming, bursting colors coming out of the top. Now, as we move through this colorful gallery, we learn why Albuquerque and some of the different people that are associated with this. We get to see some of the beautiful artifacts, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. And then they also have some screens where you can see the actual flights, and it is spectacular, I will say. But let's go dive into some of these details within this single hall right here. This is going to paint the picture for us with the story of Albuquerque, and then we'll move forward to some other really interesting things that I see ahead. In our first section, we learn why Albuquerque, and it says since 1972, the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta has attracted participants and spectators from all over the world. For pilots, it's a pilgrimage every single October. For out-of-town and local visitors alike, the Balloon Fiesta is a joy-filled week. Oh, there's so many cool photos. This one is super fun though. Do you recognize a familiar face? It looks kind of like Snoopy. Now the festival we know today was not always such a large festival. It was a small gathering at first. And here we talk about a little bit more about how they selected the location that they were going to be in, but also some of the first participants and what their balloons looked like. It's a lot of detail, and this section does contain a lot more reading material that I definitely encourage you to do, because the facts here are so neat and they're such a niche thing that otherwise I would have had no idea about. But this one right here, the party, let's look at that one. Something to note on each of these displays is they do have English and Spanish on each one of them, which is really, really cool and super handy, especially considering that they have such a diverse group of people who come into the museum. It says here though in this one that the annual Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta was started with a different kind of party. It was started all back in 1971 when the Albuquerque resident Sid Cutter was decorating his company's aircraft hangar for a World War I themed joint. They were doing this for his Mother Virginia's birthday party, and that's kind of what inspired the first initial idea of this particular festival. And I think that that's so cool that it came from such humble beginnings and turned into the large-scale thing that we know it to be today. In fact, here you can see what that might have looked like right there. They had a little hot air balloon that they were actually renting out, and that's where everything began. Of course, from those humble beginnings grew and grew and grew a bigger and bigger event each year. And now they have like princess, queen, and a slew of other things that happen that are all centered around the balloons. The balloons, of course, are the rock stars of the event. However, there are a lot of other moving parts on the ground to make for the fiesta that we all have seen around the world. So I think that that's really cool. So that's kind of the context of Albuquerque. But again, we have a lot to go. This place is a multi-floor place. This gallery is really cool. At the first part of the gallery, you see that they say that none of this would be possible without all of the volunteers and the people who work behind the scenes. They call them the zebras. So there's a zebra hat here, but there's some other really interesting artifacts from various people who have participated in the events themselves. I'm going to show you a few of those. Again, there's tons of reading here, so you can definitely deep dive. Some great stories about some locals as well as some people from across the country who have pitched in on this one. Definitely a good one to kind of spend some time in. We learn here that there is an entire culture behind hot air ballooning, and you actually have some information about how you can participate in that. They like pins and patches. I like patches. In fact, I picked one up before I started moving around, and I'll show that to you when we get out to the van. It's really cool, and it's going to be great on the roof of my van. But this is a really neat thing about how that you can start collecting, and then also kind of the way that it works a little bit more. It's right next to another display which is absolutely fascinating, what it would be like to be inside of the hot air balloon. And we get to get right inside and see what it looks like. So as we move inside of this is what it would be like to be inside of the balloon. Right above my head, as you can see, there are these two massive things, one of which has a handle on it. And these would actually be what pump that hot air and the fire into the balloon itself. But there's a lot more to this than just this mechanism. There are also all of these things which would be in the basket. And as you can see, it's a little bit more of a complex situation than just hop in a basket and go. But one of the things I thought was really neat is that they include this tiny thing right here that explains each of these items to us in more detail. So the things above us were propane heaters, and then you can see that there are propane tanks. So these are just massive propane tanks, very similar to what you use whenever you're at a campfire or at your home to run your barbecue grill. They're just bigger versions. You also would have to have a fire extinguisher. That's super important. A drop line, that way you can make sure that you have attachment to the ground. You have a crew radio and a VHF aviation radio. You would be required to carry FAA paperwork anytime that you're in your balloon. So that would be in this little pouch right here. Also, you would need a landing zone map. That way you would know exactly where you are at any given time and where it's safe to be. Inside here you also see there's a flight manual, and then there's that little map. And so yeah, this is what it would be like. A lot of moving parts in here. This is the rope inside, and then this is your fire extinguisher. It takes a lot to make it look so effortless. It really does. But just to give a little bit more context to it, they also have this area over here, which is a little harder to see on camera because it's a darker space, but it shows you some of the balloons taking off. And this is like a nice little arc, so it really looks three-dimensional. Look at this, guys. It's showing you what it would be like to be inside the balloon and see all of these other balloons around you, and how that they disperse that propane so that it really creates that takeoff power. And it looks like there's something else over here too. What is this? Swipe to look around. Oh, that's cool. So as I move my finger, watch this. It's a 360 view. That is epic. And because it isn't just a single person who's doing this, there are actually different names for different positions. Those are all listed on this sign, and you can see them while they're actually at work on some of these photos right here also, which is really neat. There are also bios of some of those people on this screen as well. So look at that. Isn't that cool? Now, for many of us, we will never have the opportunity to go up in a hot air balloon, and that's just the sad reality of it. But for those who are lucky enough to do so, it is such a cool, amazing thing to be able to see these aerial views and to be able to experience something that has been around since the 1700s as one of the first methods for seeing the world in a different perspective. But for the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta specifically, it's like a city of moving parts. Let me show you a few of these facts. Here you will find that there are over 880,000 visitors annually who drink 325,000 cups of coffee, and 72,000 donuts are consumed. Not to mention there's 130,000 cups of hot cocoa, because it's kind of chilly here in the mornings especially. Now, in the center section, 620 hot air balloons with 120 special shaped ones. There are usually 50 entertainers, 300,000 breakfast burritos so that everyone can be alert and awake for those early sunrise flights. And then you have volunteers, 1,200 per year, with 450 porta potties and 18 countries on average represented. Now that is a lot of moving parts, to say the least. Again, these are the averages, so in some years there are more countries represented, on some years there are less, but on average 620 regular balloons go up into the air and are absolutely beautiful. But those 120, oh my goodness. Whenever I saw once that Smokey the Bear had his own balloon that looked like himself, and it was here at Albuquerque, I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to see that one day. So I know that as the spectacle goes into the skies, that everyone is looking up, probably with their mouths open and their sunglasses on, going, wow. Now let's get into some of the mechanics of these balloons. Again, we know now these are the propane burners. However, do you notice that there are a lot of different kinds? Well, over the years, they have changed time and time again, and here you can see many examples of them. You can also find some of the color swatches from various balloons, and here you can see the name of each person and then also what kind of basket that they would use, and it's just a little catalog of joy through color. Now, throughout this first gallery also, there are a variety of different kinds of baskets with straps and apparatuses, and these are each labeled. This is actually a prototype that was called the Raven right here, and do you notice something right here? They actually have a QR code. Now, each one of these displays has one so that you can find out a little bit more about the exhibit, and you can do this and then save it on your phone and then go back and look at it even after you have been here at the museum, which I absolutely think is awesome. This one caught my eye though out of all of them. This one is actually called the Body Helmet, and it was an experimental model, and it's even labeled inside experimental. But you can see here that it looks like it has a hard shell on the entirety of the item, and it does because it is a gondola style. Now here we find out a little bit more about what it would have looked like in its actual use. And again, that QR code, super handy. But look at this. It's very different. Now I think you can see why I was interested in it. It's different colors on each side. It's really bright, it's really bold, and it's very reflective of the overall vibe of hot air balloons. Believe it or not though, guys, that was just one of the galleries. Now we're going down a short flight of stairs to something that I can only say is something I had no idea even existed. This is called the Double Eagle, and it looks kind of like a boat. Do Do you see what I'm talking about? It looks kind of like a flat-bottom boat, but in fact, this is not a boat. This is yet another hot air balloon basket. And the balloon goes up, up, up. For context, there is a third story right there, which is the second story from the ground level. It far surpasses that to go up to the full ceiling up here. Yeah, huge. Oh, but we can actually walk inside of it too and see what it would have been like. Wow, this is not your average balloon. Look at this. It has an entire like lineup of things, electronics everywhere. And then there's a couple of seats here, a few propane containers, definitely a much bigger rope. Yeah, this is big. Now amongst this museum, they also do a lot of different like interactive things and also talks. So like for example, while I'm visiting, there's actually a school of kids who are right inside talking to someone and they're telling them about hot air balloons, which I think is really cool. But they also do some different things throughout the year where you as an adult can also be a part of those. So if you come, ask if there's a special program or call ahead. Yeah, this is not normal. Like this back here in the back, it says in the Senate of the United States, and yeah, they have an actual 95th Congressional Senate Resolution 540 there from 1978. That is really cool. And there's also a City of Albuquerque executive order just for this double eagle. And you can see a few of the photos that represent the double eagle as well. In fact, there's a large display about the double eagle. They've received numerous keys to the city. They have had numerous accolades and done a lot of really cool things. So I'm going to show you a few of these. Again, I'm not able to do anything but scratch the surface because there's so much information, but I'll show you some of my favorites. The Double Eagle has its own ballad that went to record by Courtesy Records. There's a 1978 Double Eagle patch. There are commemorative and congressional medals for the Double Eagle. They also have here that things were carried on board for airmail through the Double Eagle, and it was considered to be balloon mail. But in this case right here, I think that the Double Eagle makes its biggest mark right here. These are actually meteorological data that were taken from the Double Eagle, and here you can learn a little bit more about that. Really impressive stuff. This case explains it a bit more. This is a few of the variations of stories that are provided here at the museum. And notice on this one right here, Epic Journey Ends in California Hills, the Voyage of Double Eagle 5, there's numerous versions. And guess what? Here is yet another Double Eagle. The Double Eagles were capable of great things, massive things, not just your typical up and down balloon ride. These things were harvesting data. They were taking crazy trips which were unheard of in a hot air balloon. And they had to have a lot more stuff as a result, which explains why they are so much larger. In fact, as we kind of walk in this direction, you can see, look at this one, it's huge. Now, as you can imagine, a feat like this is not something that comes cheap. It does take a lot of work, a lot of money, and a lot of time. So, to create this Double Eagle, the Double Eagle 5, they needed a few people with bigger bank accounts. And one of the men who was behind that was none other than the founder of Benihana. In fact, we learned here that Rocky Aoki had his hand in a lot of different things. He was a former Japanese Olympic wrestler, and he also sponsored the Benihana Grand Prix, which was the largest offshore powerboat race in the world. But he was just one of the guys behind this. In fact, as we go down this row, we find all of the other men who are also responsible for this amazing feat right here. The Double Eagle 5 was a gas balloon. It used a gondola that was 18 feet by 9 feet by 8 feet that was constructed of fiberglass covered in styrofoam and reinforced with Kevlar. It weighed about 1,500 pounds, and at takeoff was 14,700 pounds. The crew on this was Ben Abruzzo, Rocky Aoki, Ron Clark and Larry Newman. The Double Eagle 5 was the first manned free gas balloon to cross the Pacific. It took it 84 hours and 31 minutes to span 5,768 miles, and they did this from November 10th through 12th of 1981. So earlier we saw the sign that said that they had a little bit of a crash, and it shows here what exactly happened. It landed in the Mendocino National Forest about 140 miles north of San Francisco, and it made a pretty rough landing due to the rains and the windstorms that were going on at the time. The gondola actually landed on the ridge and rested on top of the trees. Now, despite this crash, they still were able to set the distance record by over 2,000 miles, which is insane. Again, this isn't just about up and down, guys. These things are doing magnificent things, but there's another big one over here that we have to go check out. This is the Breitling Orbiter 3. Now, something I thought was really neat about this one was to meet the needs of what they needed inside the cabin itself. They had solar panels which were draping below, and they said that they looked a lot like Venetian blinds, how that they were set up. So that is really, really neat and very different than anything else that I've seen. But there's a little bit more information about what this looked like right over here. There it is, guys, right there. It was considered to be a high-tech hot air flight. Right there is the actual capsule that we see in front of us, and in comparison to the massive balloon, this thing looks like a tiny little speck, but in person this thing is really big. Now, this guy back here was launched in 1999 and actually was launched from Switzerland. So it wasn't launched here, it was launched in Switzerland. And I just think that the story behind this one is really, really neat, because again, you can see how big it is, but how small it looks. Next up, we see the Spirit of Freedom, which is very similar in design but much smaller. It's only 7 feet long, 5.5 feet wide, and 5.5 feet tall. Now, this one's great because you can kind of see how this would have worked with the larger balloon, and each one of these areas is marked with an interesting little piece of the puzzle. So as we move in closer, you'll notice that it has a hot air cone. That's everything that's in the red. And then right here we have a helium cell, which is everything in this blue right here. And at the very top up there, there's something called a tent helium cell, which is that tiny blue thing up at the top. Now, of all the people we've seen thus far, I would say that this guy right here is probably one of the most brave. His name is Steve Fawcett, and he was determined to go solo around the world in the Spirit of Freedom balloon. The only problem is he was flying in an unpressurized cabin, and he was quoted to say right here, "It's like a mountain climber who scales Everest without oxygen. A big danger is sleeping. You might take your mask off or get a kink in your hose. You might wake up gasping, or you might not wake up at all." Now, the reason why I said what I did was because he didn't just try this once. He tried it 5 times unsuccessfully before he finally made it to his 6th attempt, and he finally made it. That would be a lot to kind of process through, doing that not once, but 6 times. Now, I kind of stepped away from where we were so I could look around kind of at a distance. And as you'll notice, we covered this, and we covered that. But if we look up, what is this? We're gonna have to go up to the next floor to see that in just a second. But there's a couple of other vessels also that were talked about just a little bit on some of the signs that we had gone past. Pretty neat stuff, to say the least. Not gonna cover all those, wanna leave some mystery for you guys, but these are just so spectacular, and to be able to see the history alongside the vessel itself and get a size reference is amazing. This is not something that you can do anywhere else to my knowledge. Now, I have been to the Air and Space Museum in DC, and they have a lot of really cool stuff, but it mostly focuses on like rockets and ships and planes. I didn't see a whole lot about the hot air balloons there. So come here, come here. Now, along this wall we have not only the balloon replicas up here, which there's a sign that tells you a little bit more about each of those, but there's also a touch display and some more interesting balloon facts. In fact, these are really, really neat. like the inaugural Special Shape Rodeo actually happened in 1989, or the Balloon Fiesta celebrating its 50th anniversary 2022, so last year. And then right here, Balloon Fiesta Park, fully grassed 2002. The school program 2001. The first and only time 1,000 balloons participated, 2000. And the list goes on and on, guys. Just past that though, what is this? Well, this display right here actually is speaking about this man who took many stratospheric balloon flights, jumping out of his gondola 3 times. Wow. That is crazy, because here you can actually see him doing it too. And then this replication is him flying through the air. And then this thing, well, that's a whole nother story. This is the Strato Lab Gondola from 1954. It was an aluminum and electric wiring device that General Mills initiated the construction of. Now, the original goal for this was that it would be attached to a series of small balloons and be able to go way, way on up there. They wanted to put this together to be a working lab in the sky that could be more easily up and down from the surface. However, it never came to fruition. It ended up in storage before it was refurbished and eventually brought here. It's a really cool thing to see though. And even though there's a rope here, you can kind of crouch down and see some of the things that were inside of it. Let's see if we can get a little bit better look. You can see inside there's a control panel. There's a couple of seats in there. It looks like there are a couple of other things that are kind of interesting. Without context as to what exactly it was going to be doing though, it's kind of hard to learn much more than that. Speaking of context, here it is. This was the original goal right here. Project Strato Lab, led by the United States Naval Research, made balloon flights into the stratosphere. And so they were hoping that this would be the next wave of discovery. Oh, I think I see where this is going. Black and white, black and white, black and white, zebra. So as we're looking at the zebra over here, we're looking at some of the photos of the actual zebras at the event itself. We learn that they kind of got their name by accident. During the 1975 Balloon Festival, the launch directors wore referees' jerseys that they'd purchased from a local sporting goods store to help them stand out on the field. It really caught on, and now the name zebra remains, and it has become an iconic piece of the Balloon Festival. Oh, here is a Nomad gondola, and I'm going to read a little bit more about this, but let's take a look at it first. Now, this design was created by Sid Cutter and his team, and they were looking to streamline the process and make it more available to others, but at the same time provide really good stuff. So they marketed this as the balloon basket that you needed, because it had an opening door, it had interior that was actually really nice, and you could sit down on it because it was nice and padded. Now, how much do you think in the 70s that this bad boy cost? How much? Just make a figure in your head. $8,000 or $9,000 in the 70s. That's still not very affordable, I don't think. Just past the balloon basket and closer to the entry actually is this section called Arctic Air, and we are about to go inside this room right over here and learn a little bit more. As we walk into this room, we walk back to 1895 when this guy right here had an idea. He wanted people to be able to go all the way up to the North Pole. And so he had a thought as to how that could happen. And this entire gallery is dedicated to the people in his life that were there to support him, the people in his life who might not have probably thought that was a great idea, but they went along for the ride. And what happened? Now, in his initial plan, he thought that by using a hot air balloon, they could avoid the ice and snow simply by flying over them. So this was his proposal. They could take a balloon all the way up to the North Pole, and they could do so and be able to really explore that area a little bit more safely. Of course, in order to do that, they had to do a lot of testing. So this guy right here was actually part of the team that tested the balloon's fabric to see if it would actually hold up and if it would do what it needed to do. On the flight itself, he was also the guy who took the aerial photographs for future mapping of this area, which was part of the reason why this guy thought it was a good idea to do this entire project. They could have more knowledge of what was actually up there. Now, like with all projects, not everything always goes as planned immediately. So this guy right here actually came in and used the same experimental model after the first model had failed. So he also was moving toward this goal because they all thought it was a great idea. And on the expedition, he went on to go ahead and make some meteorological and scientific observations. Even though he kept detailed notes, he did not keep a personal logbook, unlike the others. A few other faces along the way. Each one of these, of course, has a little bio here so you can see what exactly they contributed. And right here, there is a big touchscreen so we can learn more. Now, like the Benihana sponsorship, guess what? There were sponsors on this trip too. And here you get to learn a little bit more about each one of them. Some of these names kind of sound familiar. Like, for example, King Oscar II. Yeah, they had a king on board with them. This was not a project that was coming easily, so they needed somebody, again, with the money. I think one of the most interesting things about coming to a place like this is you never truly know what you're going to find. And as we move from exhibit to exhibit, we learn so many things about the earliest days of hot air ballooning. So often we only know about what's right in front of us. So deep diving, we get to learn that there's all of this texture and fabric that makes these stories really come to life. And through that little gallery right there, we learned that they were hoping to discover so many things through the use of hot air balloons. That is so neat. Now we use planes. Now here we move into the Danes Island launch site, and inside this gallery we learn what made them decide to launch, what some of the hesitations were, a little bit more about the balloon design itself, and then also that they used hydrogen. The balloon itself was constructed in the balloon house, so they had to build a building just to create the structure for the balloon. And here you can see the schematics of how that would have happened, as well as some more details as to why they needed to shelter the balloon. In fact, right here it says in November of 1985, he put out the call for the designs. The building has to be no less than 20 meters or 65.6 feet in diameter and 25 meters or 82 feet high. The launch site that they chose was already in a super cold area, so they needed to shelter all of the work that they were doing in order to be able to do it correctly. And that was the main thing that they had to start with the ground floor after they determined where they were going to start the journey from. Then whenever they started generating the hydrogen, they had to create the infrastructure for that as well. And last but not least, they had to figure out what exactly that they were hoping to uncover on this expedition. They couldn't just be doing it as a leisurely thing. They needed goals. And because they had a scientific focus, they wanted to find out what kind of things that they would potentially want to gather so that they could accommodate for the weight. Another really cool display right here. This is the Journey to the North Pole game. The rules are over here on the wall. It's just kind of a fun, interesting thing with tons of great information even in the game itself. But right next to that is something I'm very interested in. The balloon envelope, net, and valves are all explained here. Now on all of those signs that we've been looking at to find out more about those balloons in the main gallery, it would mention the envelope. And here it explains what exactly the envelope is. In this case, it says that the balloon itself was made out of a Chinese silk, numerous layers of it, and that near the valves, the envelope itself was reinforced. Now, the envelope, or the carrier, right here, yeah, the carrier is the envelope. It was 87.5 feet from the crown to the load ring. So that means from the very top, which is the crown, to the load ring, which is where it receives its fuel right down here. Now you can see here that they're weighing it down with all of these little sandbags and that they have a net around it. The net was made out of 384 interwoven hemp cords. So in reality, it would have looked like this, but on a much larger scale. Now the gondola or basket had to accommodate 3 people to be able to comfortably be in there and not just be bumping elbows every 2 seconds. Plus they needed to be able to have the supplies that they needed and also be able to bring things back. So this particular gondola was very interesting. You can kind kind of see it a little bit better through this illustration, but the roof of the gondola doubled as a platform for observation, and then they could actually go inside of the basket portion or the gondola portion to get out of the elements also. In this display, we learn about some of the instruments that would have been used and where their positioning would have been around the basket or gondola, and each one of these, it tells a little bit more about them, as you can see here. And of course, you can't have a balloon without having some kind of ropes. And this particular balloon launch had 3 guide ropes of different lengths, which were attached to suspension rings. Another interactive display right here. We push to start.
The balloon floating freely in the sky will travel in the same direction and speed as the wind. The altitude of a gas balloon like Andre's will be affected by the weight of the balloon.
I love it. It tells you exactly how the balloon flight works, how they're able to steer it and have direction, and then also the importance of the ropes themselves. So super, super cool. But as we go past that, then we start the actual flight in this room. And this is a long line in appearance, but when you look at it a little bit closer, these actually all are significant because these are all the heights of the balloon as it kind of went through its initial flight. As you can see here, they started off on the ground in the ice and they launched straight upwards to 600 meters. And at that point, they had already lost 2 of the 3 guide ropes. And the weight loss of those were approximately 1,168 pounds. By the time that they were able to go down to here, which was only a short time later, they dropped to 100 meters to pass through some clouds. And then it just keeps going on and on from there until they get to a safe coasting time right in this time frame. It says at midnight between July 11th and 12th, the balloon entered the shadow of a cloud. The gas contracted and the balloon lost its lift, and then a fine drizzle added weight to the balloon, making it have to stay much lower than they had initially anticipated. By the time they reached this point, as you can see, they were on the ground on July 14th after flying 65 hours and 35 minutes. These are the things that they might have had to deal with after that. As you can see, a primitive tent, polar bears, lots of interesting little things that all would have had to have been available to them either on the ground already or through the basket that they took with them. As you again read through these signs, it says that they had to create a division of labor, they had to create a plan for their existence, and they had to pack everything and be able to trek across the very crazy conditions that existed on the North Pole. Much like many of the expeditions that we've seen previous here in the United States, you can only imagine what that would have been like. They would have had to forage for their food. They would have had to pack all of their things in order to move from place to place every single time. They would have had to bundle up and kept their extremities completely covered so they didn't get frostbite. And occasionally they would run into a very interesting critter that they would have to handle. So it wasn't for the faint of heart, and they only had a crew of 3 people. Ooh, what is this? What is this? Oh, this is cool. The floor has a projection on it that says, "It was you and Mother Nature." Okay, that was super cool because after you come out, there's a little sign right here that says that those are actually the words of someone who was up in the air, reflecting on her time while up in the air. And as you read the words, they change, and those are her thoughts. Super, super neat. Okay, this gallery is cool because it talks about the inaugural race here in Albuquerque. It's called the Coyote and Roadrunner race. Of course, after the cartoon, you'll see them here in a second. But that happened in 1972. So this gallery reflects on some of the imagery that is symbolic of that. It's illustrating the balloon festival in a very fun way. You can see here these illustrations. These were the first conceptual sketches that they had from 1972 to 1974. In fact, here you have the 2 iconic characters, and these were some of the advertisements that were used for the first ever event. By the time we got to the third event, they were both on the poster together. Bright colors, bold, fun. That was in 1974. And then the list just goes on and on and on. These are all Coyote and Roadrunner classic pieces right here. Of course, these classic pieces that are on display are from the original Chuck Jones drawings, and I think that that's just awesome. Chuck Jones was a known animator who worked for Warner Brothers and created some of the most iconic things that we still know today. Beep beep. Okay guys, you saw that. So pretty, so epic. Love the illustration. But now we're going into Elevation Station, which is just bright, colorful, and looks like a hot air balloon. Okay, are you ready guys? This is potentially one of my favorite rooms here. This is so cool. Look at this, it's so bright, so colorful. Now in this section there are a lot of things that are designed for the kiddos so they can color in their own hot air balloon. There's an interactive display where they can actually touch and find out how high the balloons fly and things like that, which is super neat. And there's this room that's called the color room that I just want to kind of chill in for a minute. This is epic. Oh wow, that was fun. But at the same time, there's other people in there, so I didn't want to film a lot because, you know, other people don't necessarily always want to be in my video, especially young children. So I'm going to come back out to this main gallery area, and there's one other area just past this lab thing that we need to go check out. It's over here and it looks pretty neat. Oh, this is really neat. It's about the weather lab. Now in this gallery, as we move around, it talks about where weather happens, when we started forecasting weather. It has some beautiful art in here, some photos that have been taken, and a couple of really interesting structures. We will start off by going in here, and there's a display about the sun as well as a video. 74% of the sun is made of hydrogen. It makes sense as to why this is here, because hydrogen balloons, hydrogen sun, yes, yes, oh yes. Okay, I'm going to show you this from a variety of different directions here. You can see that there are dips and mountains or peaks. This is a wood wall that is designed for you to touch it. And as you touch it, you are supposed to understand that this is showing you an illustration for pressure. As this illustration, whenever we touch, the high pressure actually sinks and it spins outward in a clockwise direction. But the low pressure rises and then spins in a counterclockwise direction. So high pressure and low pressure, it forms these little waves that just feel so cool. We are now going to talk about clouds. And in here, there is another touch screen where you can go inside, touch it, and it talks about clouds. In this illustration, you can see what each cloud is called and what they look like. And you can kind of see how this would relate to the balloons, because you need to know what kind of clouds that you're around on if you can go up in the air or not. We are just getting so many brain wrinkles today, all the while just really enjoying exploring these very fascinating rooms. Like this one, This is, it looks like a tunnel made up of cheese. Of Swiss cheese. Oh, but this isn't cheese at all. Instead, it's talking about water. And here you can find out all sorts of cool water facts. Like only about 3% of the Earth's water is actually fresh. And about 75% of that is stored. Now again, why do all these things matter? Because all these are factors for them to be able to go up in the balloons. They learn a lot of things about these storms from being in the air. They also learn about what you shouldn't be doing in these storms based on all of these conditions. So we get a weather lesson and also get to see the cool balloons. This is awesome. Now remember how we talked about that they wanted to use these balloons to help them to be able to observe different weather conditions? Well, they also use satellites. And there's a section here about satellites where you can see kind of what a satellite might look like and some of the imagery that satellites have taken. In addition, again, all of this wonderful reading material so you can find out what from those images we're able to deduce and plan to make sure that we stay a little bit safer while here on the surface. Okay guys, I came upstairs and from here you can see an aerial view of all of these ones that we looked at before and some of them that we couldn't see as well because we were below them. But probably one of the most impressive parts, these two, the balloon. Look at this. You get a clear view of them up here and it's just so huge. It's bigger than it even looked from below. Look at how much support that they're needing just to hold these up. That is insane. But we also make it to the section of special shapes. Did you know that because of the intricate designs, they actually require a larger crew in order to pilot one of these and to get it going also? Now, special shapes are not just your typical bulbous look. In fact, it's very different. You can have a variety of different things. Like I said before, Smokey the Bear had one. It looked like his little head. But there's several others also. And they have one on display right up here that I want to show you. Check that out. Isn't that cool? Notice that it has a lot of extra details on it that does make it a little bit more complex when they're inflating it, but also whenever they're taking care of it. But it's so neat to be able to visualize these in person. They also have the Vote balloon here, which is the first product-shaped modern hot air balloon. And you can see right here on the picture it says Vote. And it would have had a small basket like this one right here, which would have only had one person in it. Now the interesting thing about the Vote balloon was because it was so long that by the time that the air got to the top it was already cooling. And because it was such a small basket, they couldn't have like tons of stuff in there. So it became a little bit problematic. It was originally slated to appear at both the Republican and Democratic conventions. However, safety took over and they said, no, let's not do that. Again, because pins are such a part of the trade, here are some of the special shape pins. And each one of these signifies one of these special shape balloons that they've had here. Now there's a couple that are my favorites, so let's zoom in. We found the bunny. Definitely have to mention the bunny. But there's also an Energizer bunny. There's some more of those Garfields right next to some Disney characters. And here's what some of those special balloons might look like up in the air. They're big, they're beautiful, they're cool, and it's hard to see on the camera, but these are all people who are staring up at that. Look at how many people those are. Now we've seen a lot of cool things, but I have one last thing that I wanted to save for absolute last because it's so big. And this is a very small version of the very big one, so bear with me on this. Now this is the Zeppelin, and we've heard stories about the Zeppelin before. It was a gas-powered balloon with a 98.5 foot gondola. Now in comparison to all of the other balloons, this one stood hands above the rest because of its sheer power. In fact, they actually had the first commercial passenger flight around the world in one of these guys right here. Now, unlike an airplane, these had some luxury accommodations. You can see here, nice interior furniture, very similar to that you would have in a home. They had a sleeper cabin that had a couch that converted into 2 bunks, a table, a folding stool with closets and windows. And I thought when we walked in here that this thing was big, but it's nothing in comparison to the actual one. It would fill this entire room, probably, and keep going. This room I don't think is anywhere near as long as that guy would have been. So yeah, very interesting little tidbit of history to kind of round out our time here in Albuquerque. This has been a really great experience and I'm super happy that we came. Now I would recommend coming here when it's not fiesta time. Just saying, because during fiesta time it's pretty busy. It's super busy and all these people are running around like chickens with their head cut off, probably actually at the fiesta. Okay guys, out to the van I am, and this is the patch that I picked up. I loved it because it did have that special shape balloon that they have, but it also has a couple of other super cool ones. And so yeah, this is gonna go up on the roof now. Yay!